true sacrifice in Islam begins in the heart before it ever appears in actions or outward deeds. Many people associate sacrifice only with physical acts such as giving wealth, performing Qurbani, or spending in charity. While these actions are important and highly rewarded, the deeper reality is that Allah looks first at the state of the heart. If the heart is not sincere, then even great outward sacrifices lose their spiritual value. But when the heart is pure and submitted to Allah, even small actions become great in reward and meaning. The foundation of sacrifice is sincerity, known as ikhlas. This means doing everything solely for the pleasure of Allah without seeking recognition, praise, or approval from people. A person may give a large amount in charity, but if the intention is to impress others, then the spiritual reward is diminished. On the other hand, a small act done quietly for Allah alone carries immense weight in the sight of the Creator. This shows that sacrifice is not measured by size but by sincerity. Sacrificing the heart means giving Allah priority over personal desires. Every human being has desires, attachments, and emotions that influence decisions. Sometimes these desires align with obedience, and sometimes they conflict with it. True sacrifice happens when a believer chooses Allah's command over personal preference. This internal struggle is the real beginning of worship. Without it, outward actions become routine rather than meaningful acts of devotion. Another important aspect of heart sacrifice is removing love for anything that competes with the love of Allah. This does not mean abandoning family or worldly responsibilities, but rather ensuring that nothing becomes more beloved than Allah. When the love of Allah is strongest in the heart, all other loves fall into their rightful place. This balance allows a believer to live in the world without becoming attached to it in a way that weakens faith. The heart is also where intentions are formed, and intentions determine the value of every action. The Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, emphasized that actions are judged by intentions. This means that sacrifice begins long before the action itself. It begins at the moment a person decides why they are doing something. A heart that is aligned with Allah naturally produces righteous actions, while a heart driven by ego or desire leads to imbalance. Sacrificing the heart also means letting go of spiritual diseases such as pride, jealousy, arrogance, and envy. These traits prevent a person from fully submitting to Allah. Pride makes a person feel self-sufficient, jealousy creates resentment, and arrogance distances the heart from humility. Removing these traits is one of the hardest forms of sacrifice because it requires constant self-awareness and effort. However, it is also one of the most rewarding forms of purification. Prophet Ibrahim, AS, represents the highest example of heart-based sacrifice. Before any physical action, his heart was already fully submitted to Allah. This is why he was willing to obey even the most difficult command without hesitation. His sacrifice was not only in action but in complete emotional and spiritual surrender. This teaches that true devotion begins where the heart surrenders completely to the will of Allah. Sacrifice of the heart is also an ongoing process. It is not something achieved once and then completed. Every day presents new opportunities to either follow the desires of the heart or align it with Allah's guidance. Each moment becomes a test of sincerity, patience, and submission. True sacrifice in Islam ultimately means that the heart becomes fully devoted to Allah, where love, intention, desire, and action all align in submission, making every aspect of life an expression of worship and obedience to the Creator. Sacrificing sins before anything else is one of the most important lessons in the life of a believer, especially when reflecting on the meaning of devotion to Allah. Many people think sacrifice only means giving something valuable in the physical sense, such as wealth, time, or an animal during Qurbani. However, the first and most essential sacrifice is internal, giving up sins, bad habits, and anything that distances a person from Allah. Without this inner sacrifice, all outward acts of worship lose their deeper spiritual impact. Every believer carries certain weaknesses and habits that are not pleasing to Allah. These may include lying, anger, neglecting prayers, harming others, dishonesty, or following desires that lead to disobedience. Sacrificing sins means making a firm decision to leave these behaviors behind for the sake of Allah. It is not just about feeling regret, but about taking action to change. This is the true beginning of spiritual growth. One of the biggest challenges in leaving sins is that they often become familiar and comfortable over time. Even when a person knows something is wrong, they may continue because it F. Il zizio pere aveyerucha. This is where true sacrifice begins. A believer must choose Allah over comfort even when it is difficult. Giving up something harmful for the sake of Allah is more valuable than any physical sacrifice because it directly purifies the soul. Prophet Ibrahim, AS, teaches this principle through his life. Before any physical act of sacrifice, his entire life was already based on obedience and submission. He left behind false beliefs, rejected societal pressure, and turned completely toward Allah. This shows that true sacrifice begins long before any major event. It begins with daily choices to avoid sin and follow guidance. His example reminds believers that inner obedience is the foundation of all worship. Sacrificing sins also requires self-awareness. A believer must constantly reflect on their actions and identify areas where improvement is needed. Without reflection, a person may continue sinful behavior without realizing its spiritual impact. Self-awareness is key. The first step toward change, because a person cannot fix what they refuse to acknowledge. Adha becomes a powerful reminder to look inward before focusing on outward rituals. Another important aspect is repentance. Sacrificing sins is not only about stopping bad actions, but also about sincerely turning back to Allah. No matter how many mistakes a person has made, the door of repentance is always open. Allah's mercy is greater than any sin, and a sincere return to Him wipes away past mistakes. This gives hope to every believer that change is always possible. Sacrificing sins also strengthens the heart. When a person leaves disobedience, their heart becomes lighter and more peaceful. Sin often creates distance between a believer and Allah, while obedience brings closeness and tranquility. Over time, leaving sins leads to a stronger connection with prayer, remembrance, and worship. The heart becomes more sensitive to right and wrong and more aligned with faith. Another important lesson is that sins should not be replaced with new sins. When a believer gives up one bad habit, it should be replaced with good deeds. This ensures that spiritual progress continues. For example, replacing dishonesty with truthfulness or replacing neglect with consistent prayer builds a stronger foundation of faith. Sacrificing sins before anything else ultimately means prioritizing Allah above personal desires. It is choosing what is right over what is easy, and choosing obedience over temporary pleasure. This internal sacrifice is what gives meaning to all other acts of worship and becomes the foundation of a sincere and transformed life devoted to Allah. The story of Prophet Ibrahim represents the highest level of submission a human being can reach. And it teaches that nothing should ever come before obedience to Allah. His life is not just a historical account, but a timeless example for every believer who wants to understand what true faith looks like in action. His willingness to surrender everything for the sake of Allah shows that real love for the Creator is stronger than any worldly attachment, including family, wealth, and personal comfort. From the beginning of his life, Prophet Ibrahim, also known as Abraham, stood firm against his people who worshipped idols. He rejected false beliefs even when it meant standing alone. This itself was a form of sacrifice because he gave up social acceptance, comfort, and security in order to follow the truth. Many people fear losing relationships or status, but Ibrahim, AS, teaches that truth must always come before approval from people. This is the first step in understanding that nothing is more important than obedience to Allah. One of the most powerful moments in his life was when he was commanded by Allah in a dream to sacrifice his beloved son Ismail, AS. This was not just a physical act, but an emotional test beyond imagination. A father's love for his child is one of the strongest natural emotions. Yet Prophet Ibrahim, AS, placed the command of Allah above even this deep attachment. He did not delay, question, or resist. Instead, he prepared to fulfill the command with complete sincerity and trust. What makes this story even more powerful is the response of Prophet Ismail, AS. When informed about the command, he also showed submission and patience, encouraging his father to carry out what Allah had ordered. This moment shows that obedience to Allah is not limited to one individual, but can become a shared value within a family built on faith. Their combined response reflects a level of trust and submission that is unmatched in human history. Before the sacrifice could take place, Allah replaced Ismail, AS, with a ram, showing that the purpose of the test was never destruction but demonstration of sincerity. The lesson here is that Allah does not require loss from His servants, He requires obedience and sincerity. The physical act was only a symbol of a much deeper reality. That true faith means being ready to give up anything for Allah when required. Prophet Ibrahim, AS, teaches that nothing in this world should be loved more than Allah. Love for family, wealth, and life itself must always remain under the boundaries of faith. When these attachments become stronger than obedience, they can lead a person away from Allah. But when they are placed in the correct order, they become sources of blessing rather than distraction. His story also teaches that obedience sometimes requires emotional struggle. It is not always easy to follow commands that conflict with personal feelings. However, true faith is measured not by ease but by submission during difficulty. Ibrahim, AS, showed that even when emotions are strong, a believer must prioritize what Allah commands above everything else. The legacy of Prophet Ibrahim, AS, continues every year during Adha, where Muslims around the world perform Qurbani in remembrance of his sacrifice. This is not just a ritual but a renewal of commitment to the same principle he lived by, that Allah comes first in every situation. His life ultimately teaches that true success is not in holding on to everything in this world, but in being willing to give up anything when it conflicts with the command of Allah. Making obedience the highest form of love and devotion to the Creator, Allah tests people with what they love most as a way to purify their hearts and strengthen their connection with Him. These tests are not random or meaningless, they are deeply intentional and are designed to reveal the true priorities of a believer. Every human being has attachments in life, whether it is family, wealth, status, comfort, or personal desires. When Allah tests a person through these attachments, it is not to break them, but to refine their faith and bring them closer to Him. The concept of testing through love is clearly reflected in the life of Prophet Ibrahim, as he was tested in the most emotional and difficult ways, especially through his deep love for his son Ismail, AS. This test was not ordinary because it touched the strongest emotional bond a human can have. Yet this was exactly what made it a test of true faith. Allah wanted to see whether the love of Ibrahim, AS, for his Creator was stronger than his love for anything else in existence. Many people misunderstand tests and think that hardship is a sign of rejection or punishment. However, in Islam, the opposite is often true. When Allah tests someone with what they love, it can be a sign of closeness rather than distance. Just like gold is purified through fire, a believer's heart is purified through trials. The more valuable something is, the more intense the process of refining it becomes. Similarly, the stronger the faith of a believer, the deeper the test they may experience. These tests are not meant to destroy emotional bonds, but to place them in their proper position. Love for family, wealth, and life is natural and part of human nature, but these loves must never exceed the love of Allah. When attachments become stronger than obedience, they can lead a person away from the purpose of life. Through tests, Allah gently reminds believers to reorder their priorities so that everything remains centered around Him. One of the wisdoms behind testing through attachment is that it reveals sincerity. A person may claim love for Allah, but true sincerity is proven when they are willing to let go of something they deeply value for His sake. This does not always mean physical loss, but it means being ready to choose obedience over emotional attachment whenever required. This level of sincerity is what elevates a believer spiritually. Another important aspect is that these tests strengthen trust in Allah. When a person is asked to let go of something they love, they are also being guided to trust that Allah's plan is better than their own understanding. Even if the wisdom is not immediately visible, the believer is taught to believe. Allah never takes away something without replacing it with something better in meaning, reward, or spiritual benefit. Tests involving love also teach emotional balance. Without trials, a person may become overly attached to worldly things and forget their temporary nature. Through difficulty, the heart learns detachment from the dunya and stronger attachment to the hereafter. This balance allows a believer to love the world without becoming enslaved by it. The life of Prophet Ibrahim, AS, shows that when a believer passes the test of attachment, Allah raises their status and honors them in ways beyond imagination. His willingness to submit completely led to his legacy being remembered and honored by millions of believers every year. This demonstrates that what is given up for Allah is never lost, but transformed into lasting reward and honor. Allah's tests through love are therefore not punishments but opportunities for growth, purification and elevation. They help the believer understand where their true loyalty lies and guide them toward a deeper, more sincere relationship with their Creator, where love for Allah becomes greater than every other attachment in life, shaping both heart and actions in complete submission to Him. Sacrificing comfort for spiritual growth is one of the most important struggles in a believer's life, because human nature is naturally drawn toward ease, relaxation and convenience. People prefer what feels comfortable, even if it is not always beneficial for their faith or their relationship with Allah. However, true spiritual progress often requires stepping out of comfort and choosing discipline, effort and obedience over ease. Adha reminds believers that growth in faith does not come through comfort alone, but through sacrifice and commitment. Comfort can sometimes become a hidden barrier between a believer and their spiritual development. When life is too easy, a person may become careless with their prayers, neglect self-reflection and lose awareness of their purpose. They may begin to focus more on physical satisfaction than on spiritual improvement. This is why Islam encourages moments of sacrifice, because they break the cycle of comfort and remind a believer of their higher purpose in life. Prophet Ibrahim A.S. is the greatest example of sacrificing comfort for obedience to Allah. His entire life was filled with moments where he had to leave comfort behind in order to follow divine commands. Whether it was leaving his home, facing rejection from his people, or being tested with the sacrifice of his beloved son, every stage of his life required him to choose obedience over ease. His story shows that spiritual greatness is not built in comfort, but in moments of difficulty and surrender. One of the key lessons from his life is that comfort often comes with attachment, and attachment can weaken spiritual strength. When a person becomes too attached to comfort, they may avoid responsibilities, delay worship or ignore personal growth. Sacrificing comfort means choosing what is right even when it feels difficult. It means waking up for prayer when sleep feels more appealing, giving charity when saving money feels easier, and avoiding sin when temptation feels strong. Spiritual growth requires effort, and effort often feels uncomfortable. A believer who wants to strengthen their relationship with Allah must be willing to struggle against their own desires. This struggle is known as jihad al-nafs, the inner struggle against the self. It is not a physical battle, but a daily effort to choose obedience over desire, discipline over laziness, and remembrance over neglect. Sacrificing comfort also builds resilience. A person who constantly avoids difficulty remains weak in character, but a person who faces challenges for the sake of Allah becomes stronger over time. Each act of sacrifice builds patience, discipline, and inner strength. These qualities are essential for maintaining. In a world full of distractions and temptations, another important aspect is that comfort often creates spiritual stagnation. When a person is always in their comfort zone, they may feel stable, but their faith does not grow. Growth requires movement, effort, and sometimes discomfort. Just as physical strength increases through resistance, spiritual strength increases through sacrifice. Every moment of discomfort endured for Allah becomes a step toward higher faith. Sacrificing comfort also leads to deeper reliance on Allah. When a believer gives up ease and chooses obedience, they begin to realize their dependence on Allah's help. This reliance strengthens tawakkul, making the heart more connected to the Creator. Over time, the believer learns that true peace does not come from comfort, but from closeness to Allah. Adha serves as a reminder that comfort is temporary, but spiritual growth is eternal. A believer who is willing to sacrifice ease for the sake of Allah is investing in something far greater than worldly satisfaction. This sacrifice transforms the heart, strengthens faith, and builds a life that is centered on obedience, discipline, and sincere devotion to Allah rather than temporary comfort and ease. Every sacrifice made for the sake of Allah is never lost, wasted, or forgotten, even if it may seem small or unnoticed in this world. One of the most comforting truths in Islam is that Allah always rewards sincere sacrifice in ways that are far greater than what a person gives up. Whether the sacrifice is financial, emotional, physical, or spiritual, Allah sees every intention and every effort, and He promises to replace it with something better, either in this life or in the hereafter. Eidul Adha serves as a powerful reminder of this divine promise. Human beings often hesitate to sacrifice because they fear loss. People worry that if they give something up, they will become weaker, poorer, or less secure. However, Islam teaches the opposite. In reality, when something is given up for the sake of Allah, it is never truly lost. Instead, it is transformed into reward, blessings, and spiritual elevation. The believer may not always see the immediate result, but Allah's compensation is always greater and more meaningful than what was given. The story of Prophet Ibrahim AS clearly demonstrates this principle. When he was willing to sacrifice his beloved son for the sake of Allah, he was not left in loss. Instead, Allah replaced that moment of submission with honor, mercy, and everlasting remembrance. His willingness to obey became a symbol of faith for generations. Every Eid-ul Adha, millions of Muslims remember his sacrifice, showing that what is given for Allah does not disappear but becomes part of eternal legacy. Sacrifice for Allah is not limited to physical offerings. It includes every action where a believer chooses obedience over desire, truth over falsehood, and faith over convenience. When a person gives up a sin, wavers behind a harmful habit, or chooses honesty over dishonesty for the sake of Allah, that is also a form of sacrifice. These sacrifices may seem small in the eyes of people, but in the sight of Allah, they carry immense value. One of the most beautiful aspects of sacrifice is that Allah not only rewards it, but often replaces it with something better. This replacement may come in the form of peace in the heart, blessings in life, forgiveness of sins, or elevation in rank in the hereafter. Sometimes the reward is visible, and sometimes it is hidden, but it always exists. A believer may lose something temporarily, but Allah provides something far more meaningful in return. Sacrifice also strengthens faith because it teaches trust in Allah's promise. When a believer gives something up for Allah, they are essentially saying that they trust His reward more than what they are leaving behind. This builds tawakkul, a deep reliance on Allah that removes fear of loss and replaces it with hope. Divine reward. Over time, this mindset transforms how a person views life, making them more confident in obedience and less attached to worldly possessions. Another important lesson is that sacrifice purifies intentions. When a person gives for Allah alone without expecting recognition or praise, their heart becomes purified from ego and pride. This sincerity is what gives sacrifice its true value. Even small acts done with pure intention can outweigh large acts done for show. Sacrifice also creates spiritual strength. Every time a believer gives something up for Allah, their connection with Him becomes stronger. They learn that obedience brings peace and that worldly loss is never permanent when it is for the sake of the Creator. This understanding builds resilience and inner stability in the heart. Ultimately, every sacrifice made for Allah becomes a source of eternal reward, unseen blessings and spiritual elevation, proving that nothing given for the sake of the Creator is ever wasted, but instead transformed into something far greater in both this life and the next, shaping a believer's journey toward closeness with Allah and success in the hereafter.